Healthcare consumers, providers, creators, and advocates. Health and wellness should be everyone's top priority, and it's a dynamic topic, complex and sensitive to a vast array of factors from a local to an international scale. The healthcare industry is now at the forefront of everyday life and hopefully on the cusp of a renaissance. We're glad you've joined us for this series that explores the ideas shaping healthcare. I'm Minta Ferguson, healthcare architect and director of the Strategic Facility Planning Group, McMillan Pasden Smith Advisors. And this is Ideas Shaping Healthcare. I'm joined today by Erika Hill. She's an interior designer with McMillan Pasden Smith in the healthcare studio. She understands and is sensitive to the ways in which the physical environment influences moods, emotions, and behaviors. She approaches design as a holistic process that encompasses all disciplines of architecture and construction. It is through this collaborative approach that spaces not only take shape, but enhance the human experience with the built environment. So Erika, you and I, you're an interior designer. I'm an architect and really focus on the planning side. And we're responsible, or in our industry, what we do, we're responsible for turning our clients' vision into a reality. And we both work in the healthcare side. So we're working with doctors, we're working with CEOs, CFOs of healthcare groups, and the nurses and support staff. And so they're trained to save lives. They're trained to use BiPAPs and, look at heartbeats and, all this complex stuff that we don't necessarily understand. Yeah. So it's kind of on us to help them understand when we're designing a building or a space for them to understand that space. What does it mean when they're making decisions about design, the size of a room, the layout of a room? What does that mean in terms of how they need to operate, what their budget needs to look like, and how that design accomplishes that vision that they have? So we have a unique role to create that connection. And as part of our process, a lot of times we're meeting with stakeholder groups. We might be meeting with patient advocacy groups, so patients who come in and they talk to us about their experiences, what they like, what they don't like, and even so with the staff. And I think, so we have the ability to create a relationship with these people and become a confidant for them, and they start to tell us deeper, more personal things about the space that they work in or the patients that are coming into that space and healing in that area. And I think through that experience, we learn a lot of lessons about design. It's a practice. And so from one project, we get lessons learned and we can apply it to the next project and to the next project. And in essence, we can continuously make environments for people a lot better. So I would imagine that you probably, in all your years, how many years have you been doing interior design?
Almost 30.
30. So that's quite a bit of time. You have a lot of experience. You probably have some major takeaways on what are the things that clients can do or decisions in the design that really impact the experience for whether it's their staff or for patients that they probably want to take into consideration or make sure that they account for. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, I think we do spend a lot of time. We do talk a lot about the experience. The architectural side spends a lot of time going through talking about the building and the space and the operations. And then when they come to the interior, I think it's almost like they relax a minute and we start having conversations about at how they want this end result to come about. So we talk about, this works here, this doesn't work there. We have a lot of that kind of conversation. So I think some of the biggest takeaways that I have heard in multiple facilities all over the country are, the one thing we talk a lot about is your entry. What's the first experience you have with that facility and those clients and those visitors, and we talk about how. What do you want to say to your community? It's welcome to hear we're here for you, or is it we're going to put a kiosk here? So we talk a lot about that human connection and how we need to include that And I know that with technology and a lot of younger generational folks like to have kiosks and
Or
technology
iPads,
or
or
iPad.
check in on their phone.
Yeah, they don't want to really talk to anybody. But you do have a generation that still is visiting healthcare that needs to talk to someone. I can say as a patient myself, when you have a diagnosis that it's not great, when you walk in, sometimes you need to just go to somebody. You don't want to think because you're panicked about that procedure or whatever you're having that day. So we do talk a lot about that because, I think as technology changes, the idea is that we're going to leave the human element behind and not have those people at the front door. I think that that's not necessarily always the best because people do need that connection, and especially in healthcare because you are so dependent on those people as you enter those kind of facilities. So that's probably a big one that we spend a lot of time talking about.
I think it's almost like hotels, right? So they have you can check in on your phone to get to your hotel, get access. But when you get there, there's always someone there at the desk to greet you or help you check in if you haven't or if you want help. I think it's kind of that hospitality kind of approach and being empathetic to everybody and the what they're going through that day, because not everybody is there for necessarily a good or positive interaction. They could be there because they have some concerning news about their health, right?
Exactly. Well, and again, if you think about this as their first impression, a lot of times people don't visit hospitals until there is a need. And if their first impression is, well, there's nobody here, I don't know where to go, I don't know what to do, then I think that reflects badly on that facility. And so that's a challenge that, again, we have had lots of conversation about because, waiting rooms are getting smaller, entries are getting smaller, but we still really push to have that human connection in some way or form in those kind of areas. So I think that's probably one of the bigger ones.
Okay. So that, we're talking about having someone at the front desk or just at the entrance, right? It could be a greeter, kind of, a Walmart greeter. They're not at a desk. They're just there to say hello. And you think about hospitals now, there's a big staffing shortage, and it's going back also to space for them and their experience and what do they need to be efficient and successful and happy employees, right? And be able to provide the best care that they can. So what can we do from the staff experience?
Well, I think, again, we have a lot of conversation about, operations have just squeezed buildings down to minimums. And I've had a lot of conversation. I meet a lot with end users and nursing staff. And, I walk in a room and I can't tell you how many times they'll say, is it raining outside today? Or, is it sunny? Or because they haven't seen outside of a window for hours. And so, they deal with a lot of high stress, people in the hospital environment are already stressed, and then they're having to try to manage that, plus manage healthcare, plus manage staff. So, they also need a space where they can take a break. They can step out of that everyday kind of hustle and bustle, and we're forgetting those spaces. I think we're saying, well, we gave you a break room, be happy with that. And I think some of the facilities that really are realizing that that's not enough. A 5-minute break in a break room that has a tiny window, if one at all, and doesn't have any amenities for that staff, is not making the cut. I think we're looking at more like respite rooms and, again, creating break rooms that feel more like a lounge or cafe. So that you don't feel like you have to heat up a microwave meal in 5 minutes and get back on the floor.
Yeah. It's going to the mental health, the person's well-being.
Facilities are realizing that you can't just have the bare minimum to attract and retain staff, that it's got to be a little bit more because, there is that shortage. Yeah. And to attract them, if they're going to work on a floor where they're stuck inside, and have nothing, to look at or to, take a break.
Well, I think it goes back to the operating budget, right? So the operations of the building, yeah, it includes heating and air conditioning and how much square footage you're actually doing that for, which is a lot of times what's driving some of these smaller spaces. Is this long-term operations cost? But when you think about it, labor is a huge operations cost, and if there's a huge staff shortage, we're trying to recruit, trying to find people, and the costs, keep going up and up. But we have to be able to retain staff, so that is an operational cost, and sometimes it means putting a little bit more into the facility to help that side of operations.
Absolutely. And again, like I said, I think the programming gets so tight on just the operation of the building that those spaces get weeded out, or they get to be very small. I've seen surgeon lounges. I mean, think of how long a surgeon's on the floor a lot of times, and a surgeon's lounge can be tiny. So, it's usually enough room for 2 recliners and a TV. Well, that's really no respite for a surgeon that might have been on their feet for the last, 8-10 hours for surgery, but then has, another case coming up. So I think that's also, it's a challenge. It's these things that we really need to make sure that we include in our projects, or at least talk about them.
Yeah. So, the staff have a great impact on the experience of the patient. And I think a lot of, when you look at experiential design, there's the experience of the communication and interactions of people as a part of that. But I think there's also kind of the psychological effects that a building can have on patients and their experience, their well-being, their outcome in the facility. What would be your takeaways for guests and family, patients that are visiting in healthcare settings?
Well, I think it's interesting because, again, like you had said earlier, a lot of times the designer is involved in the patient advocacy groups, and we get involved in a lot of, where they'll bring former patients back into the facility to say, hey, what was great about our facility, but what can we work on? And I've heard a lot of former patients say, that the experience was great, the staff was great, but, I came in to have my baby and I had a 2-year-old and a significant other that just didn't have a space. They didn't have a place to be. They didn't have a place to go. And so that mother who's trying to, go through labor is having to worry about a family member. And, some of the conversations that we have had led to, well, what if we just provided, snacks? Or what if we provided breakfast? Or what if we provided, and when the family is thought about in those kind of manners, then the patient can actually experience or go through what they need to without the worry of, where's my family? Who's taking care of them? Because a lot of people do that. So, sometimes that experience is a built environment, and sometimes it's just operational. So again, having the advantage of being part of those groups and being able to hear those challenges is that, your design staff a lot of times can help come up with things that, again, not necessarily has to be built, but it's how do we handle patient experience and how do we handle family experience?
Total package.
Yes, because I think when the family is taken care of, or, you're not having to worry about that, then you actually can focus on yourself and your own healing or whatever the situation may be. I think the other challenge is when a staff member needs to do something on a patient, they need to have some kind of procedure and they need the family member to step out. Sometimes it's not convenient to go just stand in the hallway for 15, 20 minutes. So, where can they go? Is there a place on the unit where they could get a drink, or they could sit down, or they could plug in a laptop, or they could go do something or make a phone call, instead of having to go all the way downstairs to a cafeteria or a lobby? Have we included those kind of spaces? Because, there's a lot of critically ill patients in a hospital, and they don't always want to leave and go downstairs. They don't want to have to leave the unit. So have we included something that would handle that need?
And I think too, for example, COVID was one way that a lot of people started working virtually. So a lot of people shifted to laptops for employees. And I know through some examples of people within our own company who've had family members in the hospital, they have gone and worked at their bedside. I'm having conference calls with, a coworker who's sitting beside, their significant other, mother who had just had surgery, and it can be for multiple days at a time. So I think, being able to design, say, patient rooms or spaces on the unit where people can work is really helpful. I mean, it goes beyond just the patient, but the ability for their family to be involved in their care. And when families can be involved, I think the patient also has a better outcome when they leave. They have that support system going home.
Yeah. And some of those things, again, can be simply solved by furniture. We have a lot of conversations that waiting rooms really aren't the line the room up with chair kind of situations or look anymore.
The bus stop.
Yeah, they're not bus stations. So, how do we provide, technology tables, or do we provide, lounge seating that has, power and technology built in? I mean, I think airports have really kind of pushed that forward. Not that we always, we want our hospitals to start looking like airports, but I think they've thought about that. How do you make use of that time instead of just kind of sitting? So again, some of these are not always, let's build a new facility or let's add on. It's some minor tweaks that can be made, but I think that's what, that's the kind of conversations that we have a lot with our end users of, how do we take this space and make it more functional in any situation, whether, like I said, it's for family or if it's for visitors. It's a lot of conversation, and I feel like that's where that design staff really kind of builds that rapport and almost becomes a confidant, and they tell them those issues and we talk through those kind of things. So I think that's where our expertise and our kind of the way we look at the world can kind of help. It's a little different from architecture where it's very kind of structured.
Yeah, it's pretty rigid.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, a lot of people, if you go to a hospital and have a baby, that's usually a pretty good experience, and it helps to have a facility that supports that. But I think about too, what happens if you have a bad experience, or not that the experience in of itself is bad, but the news you're getting is bad, or what you went through was not a good situation. I'm thinking of situations where perhaps someone goes in to have a baby and their baby doesn't make it, or your loved one goes into the ER, let's say a gunshot wound or something like that, or they chainsaw off their foot and they bleed to death. Exactly. And you're there and you're grieving. I mean, you are in pain. You need help. You need space to be able to do that. How do we design that experience, right? We want to make a good setting for the bad things that are happening.
Yeah. It's funny because I've had personal experience with this, and then I've also just recently talked to a client, said, they're designing this, brand new giant waiting space, and the question is, well, if somebody, and it's for surgery, so if somebody comes out of this and the outcome's not good, where do they go? What should we do with those folks, and where should we direct them? And so when we started really looking at their facility, the chapel is really far. Mm-hmm. So, now the thought is we really need to have, again, it's a quiet room or a respite room, because some of these people are very upset. Like I said, my own personal experience was, one of my children was in the hospital and we had to, the news wasn't great, and, you can't fall apart in front of your kids, and the only place I found was a construction lobby. Mm. It's not the best option. So how do you incorporate those kind of things? And again, I think that with spatial requirements and everything else, those are the spaces that get left out. Mm-hmm. So could you create spaces on the floor that could be flex rooms? They could be a flex room for a chapel or a quiet room, but also possibly a respite space for a physician that they're in and out, in 15, 20 minutes. How do we multifunction some of these rooms like they do with operations? How do you make some of these soft spaces more than one use so that they are included and we don't forget them, so that you can have that information?
I'm kind of curious. There's maybe we have time for one more major takeaway, and something that I see going on in design of spaces, and especially right now, coming on the heels of COVID, and we've had supply chain issues, we've had labor issues, right? And it drives cost up. And so we start out designing this project, this building, and we have all these this great intent for this vision and the spaces that we need, the size of those spaces to be able to function appropriately, be flexible for the future. And you get through the design process and it's priced, and all of a sudden you're over the budget. And so you have to start VEing, right? In a lot of circumstances, you may have to do that. And I think right now we've seen more examples where it's not enough to just go in and start taking out specific design elements. It actually comes down to minimizing square footages. And a lot of facilities are conscious of the square footage that they're building. And so they're planning these small spaces. What are your takeaways on how much space should we be designing for what we want now, but does it have an impact on what we want to do in the future?
I would say probably first rule of thumb is not to design to the bare minimum. I mean, if you needed exactly that, give it a couple inches, because first of all, construction is never that accurate. I mean, we are never going to build it perfectly straight. It's never going to be exactly aligned. So that gives a little bit of wiggle room. Then we're not having to go in construction and trying to fix this or figure that out or keep our clearances. We don't have all those kind of issues that come up. I think the other implication is that I think we need to be better at communicating to our clients. If you take this out, this can happen, or this is actually the space you're going to get. I can't tell you how many times I've walked into a space that a client was adamant that we took this out or we took that out, and they come in and now you have a sofa in the room and you can't open the drawers, or you've got a piece of equipment now that has to float in the middle of the room because it wasn't thought through, it wasn't planned, and it was a matter of we need to make it smaller, and I do understand again the cost and the implications thereof, but I think our clients need to also understand if we squeeze some of these spaces so tight and so small, I think operationally at the very end of that project, they are not going to look at that and go, that was successful. It makes their job harder. They outgrow the space really quickly, and they don't have space for, things like technology changes and things that are critical to their actual job when we design it to that point. And if it's something they're adamant that we do, at least that we explain, if you do this, this is what happens, or this is what you can get. And certainly it's always their decision in the end, but make them aware of the fact of what they gain and what they lose with some of these decisions. Because I think that's the challenge. And I can say I'm always one of the last people in a building, walking through, helping them get ready for, their grand opening, and I hear these comments. Well, we can't get this, or this didn't work out the way we thought. So I think that's a big one.
So what do you think, Erika, in terms of, let's say we have a client who wants to design a new hospital patient tower. How would you structure that process to make sure that we're incorporating the design elements at the very beginning and having those conversations about how we make decisions on the size of rooms, layout of rooms, the furniture, the lighting, to reach that vision, that goals, once we identify that? How should really the design element work through the whole process? Should it start and stop and then pick up at the end? Or I think I see some clients, it picks up at the end. We really want to make it a more integrated process. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and I think that basically what you're describing is when you leave kind of the interior portion of a planning project, whether it's, a small renovation to a new greenfield hospital, if you leave that to the very end, I think it's a missed opportunity. And the reason I say that is if you think about everybody that sits around the table in all of these type of meetings, you have, your CEOs and your business folks from the hospital side, you have the architectural team and the planning team. But now, is someone really thinking about the interior? And because we all bring a different view, we all bring a different point of view and all different ways of looking at things, when you leave that element to the end, it gets lost. And if at that point, you kind of get what you get. because a lot of these spaces have already been VE'd out without discussion. There's a lot of things that have just been omitted without discussion. And again, I kind of feel like I'm always the devil's advocate sitting at the table to say, okay, but are you sure that you want to leave that out? Are you sure that's the right decision at this point? And sometimes I'm told absolutely, and sometimes I'm like, I hear, well, let's talk about that. And that's really, I think, where we all want our clients to do is we want them to make educated decisions, and we want them to talk about a lot of these decisions because they do have big impacts. But if you don't have that right group of people, which includes your interiors group, interior architecture in that mix, then I think that's a big piece of the puzzle that's left out at the very beginning.
What about integration with the client's design team and maybe even their marketing group? I know we've worked on a lot of projects where we get their marketing involved because the type of building that we're designing and the experience of it really wants to link back to their marketing and the fonts and colors and the experience that their teams are trying to develop as a brand. How does that work with you in weaving it into the design?
Well, I think it goes back to the vision. I mean, every project, no matter the size, has a vision. I mean, that's why they even started the project. So I feel like that when your design group is with the architectural and planning groups, that's our biggest goal is, you created a vision. Now let us help you translate that vision into a built environment. So that's really where we kind of start to take that vision and that branding and that concept that they want to have from facility to facility. And a lot of times the marketing people are involved, foundation folks are involved, because it's a huge collaborative group on the hospital side of, how is how do we want this project to be perceived? At the end of the day, when the project is done and everybody's visiting, how do we judge the success of that project? And again, I think if we leave out some of these elements, or we just forget, or we leave them to the last, section of the project, I think it doesn't always translate that way. So I think that's a lot of that challenge. And so that's our job, is to say, okay, you've put it into words. Let us help you look at it and figure out how it translates to a built environment.
That's great. I think when you think about what is the success at the end of the project, I think too it's what is the legacy that you've left with that building and the experiences that you've designed for people, whether it's your employees or future employees and patients to come.
And I think it's a great question just to ask at the end of the day. What would you do? What would make you consider this successful? And it's amazing the answers you'll get back from that staff, because it's all across the board. But if we can take that little bit of information and weave that into that project, then I think at the end of the day, when all's said and done, and we go on to the next and they move into their facility, that they'll walk back and we'll all feel like that this was a good experience and a successful project.
Thank you, Erika.
Thanks.
This is the Pulse Check, where I go over a few takeaways from this session. I think to create that human element in design and keep it from being purely operationally driven, I think there's 4 hidden messages in what we talked about. We had a lot of takeaways, but there's 4 clear messages that are kind of buried in there. The first is involve stakeholders that are outside your typical steering committee of leadership, right? That may be community groups, advisory boards, your marketing team, foundation members. I think the second is you got to get that group to put into words what success looks like. What does it feel like to them? Is there a story that goes along with it, a narrative? And then a set of guidelines that if you go through the process of the project and you deviate from that vision, it brings it back and it puts it back in alignment. And then I think finally, you have to have that consistent design expertise all the way from the visioning at the beginning through construction and implementation, because sometimes that's when things can go awry and decisions are made. And if you don't have, the design team sitting at the table to talk about implications of those decisions, you may not reach that success when it's time to occupy it.